Well, I was seriously thinking about disassembling this flap, at least taking this leading edge off and getting down to this spar so I could take these hinges out of there and sandblast them and clean them up. Worrying about them because the paint is flaking off of them and stuff, and they are showing a little bit of rust. But after doing a little bit of investigation on them, took a screwdriver and cleaned off the flaky paint and stuff in there and got to investigating, and I don't see any signs of any corrosion in there. There's a little bit of rust on these steel parts here. The paint was not very nice looking. It was kind of blistery and flaking off and stuff, and oftentimes that's an indication of some underlying problems with rust. But I think most of it is just because of poor prep on these parts. They're not very easy to get into to prep, and you got to take out a lot of rivets here to get these off. Got all these rivets on this leading edge on both sides. There's this plate here, and then you got to take these ribs off and then get these rivets out of that plate. And after inspecting them, both of them pretty close, I really don't see any serious rust on those hinges, and I don't see any sign of any corrosion or anything where the hinges are riveted onto that spar. So I'm not going to take them apart this time. I'm going to go ahead and finish cleaning this up. I've got a little bit of Bondo to take out of here and some rough spots on here to clean up. And I'll probably do something with the paint on these and clean that up. Then I'm going to paint that with some of the polyfiber epoxy primer. And when I get that trailing edge, I'll go ahead and clean it up, allodyne it and everything, and then paint it too before I put it on there. It'd be nice to have this thing all apart and painted with primer before it's all put together, so all the lap seams and stuff like that are protected. If I was starting it from scratch or had lots of time, maybe I'd do that, but kind of have a tendency to get into these things too far when I get started at them. And I don't see any practical reason to do it. If I was going to replace this leading edge, then I would do it. I can just go ahead and clean this up and get it primed, and then when I get that trailing edge on there to put it on, then I can get that on and go ahead and cover it, and it'll be ready to go. Meanwhile, I can spend my time working on the wing and getting it cleaned up. And I got some patches to put on it and stuff. So, as I said earlier, I was kind of worrying about these hinges rusting. I've already had one airplane that I flew several years ago, that when I came down to pre-flight it in the spring to get it ready to go, and I pulled the flaps, the hinge came off, and it had corroded this spar, and here it corroded off. We've got dissimilar metal here. This flap hinge is steel, and of course the spar is aluminum, and so with saltwater environment and stuff, you get dissimilar metal corrosion there. So I was thinking about taking these hinges off, disassembling this flap, and cleaning up that spar, painting it and painting the hinges, and putting it back together so it'd have something between the two metals to keep any dissimilar metal corrosion electrolysis from taking place. But after I took a little screwdriver and some probes and started doing some inspection on this, I decided that this hinge, both of them, were actually in pretty good shape, and there's no sign of any corrosion in the aluminum or anything between the two pieces in the aluminum. So I decided to go ahead and not take it apart. But looking at them, they look like hell. That yellow paint on it was gobbed in there. It was really hard to tell whether there was anything physically wrong with the hinge itself or not because of the paint in there. So I decided to go ahead and clean that up, and I took some paint stripper and put on these to strip the paint off of them. Anyway, there was probably 3, 4, 5 layers of paint on these things, on these hinges, and I finally got that cleaned up pretty good. I got to clean those up a little bit more. I'll make sure I've got all the residual paint stripper out of there and everything, and I get those cleaned up, and then I can prep this flap portion here to paint it. Well, I stripped all the paint off those hinges and then cleaned them up, got those pockets cleaned out as good as I could, and I took some acetone and wiped it down, washed down that leading edge real good. And I took some Cora-Seal and put on those hinges on the steel there. I coated those real good with the Cora-Seal. I just got done with that, so now I've got to wait for that stuff to dry. Well, my timeline just moved up a little bit on the repairs of this flaps. I just went to the post office and I got the trailing edge for it here. I called up Friday to Stoddard's in Anchorage to order that. They said they'd get it mailed out Monday or Tuesday. Today is Wednesday and it's here. So they did a really good job on that. So anyway, I can start putting this thing back together. Put a coat of the Seal on these hinges, and I kind of let it dry overnight and come back, and there was some thin spots on it, so I put some more on it. Well, I've still got to wait for that stuff to dry, cure totally before I put any paint on there. That looks really pretty, that black. The Seal turns into a black on the steel, and then they've got the brass here from the brazing of these bushings on there on that hinge, so it looks pretty neat. I guess I can get this thing opened up and see what the damage is here. $112.22. $100 for the trailing edge blank, $13.22 for the shipping. So the trailing edge, the proper one that's all cut and everything for that is $44, and it's $100 for this one. So actually I would have been better off, except it would have cost me $100 to get it shipped from Univair. Dakota Cub has them too, and they're a little more expensive from Dakota Cub than Univair. No, actually it was these hinges that was more expensive at Dakota Cub than Univair. I think the trailing edge was about the $45, and I don't know what they would have charged for shipping on it, but anyway, there it is. We got it. Had to have it. So here's the new trailing edge material, blank. This was 96 inches long, and they cut it off to fit in the mailing tube, so I had to cut it down below 6 feet. Well, anyway, I've got this piece here that's about 2.5 feet long left over, and then I'll have a piece about 7 or 8 inches long there left over, cutting this off. Then I have to notch this out in these places here for the ribs to fit down through and attach. Would have been a little bit tough for me to make this stuff. Anyway, I can get that taken care of now. Put that thing back together and cover it.